Hi, how's everyone doing? I'm going to kick off. I'm sure more people will continue joining as we go through. So welcome to the first ever YFood Online. It's taken us a little while to get up and running, but we're here. So we're going to be delivering lots of events online. Some will be free to attend and really useful workshops like this, and others will be paid for. So we've got plans to take Food Tech Wednesdays online. So if you're a regular Food Tech Wednesday goer, watch out for this space, and we're going to be here on the Wednesdays evenings running that. And then we're also looking at taking Link Up Online, which is the event where startups and scale-ups can book in to meet investors, they can book in to meet experts, they can book in to meet industry. So that should be happening on the 11th of May, and tickets will be going live soon for that. And there's going to be some other content. But we're here today with our partners RSM, who are leading business advisors, and they're going to help us sort of navigate through some of the challenges that we're all facing as founders and leaders of businesses in this current environment. So I know that a lot of us have had a lot of challenges recently. Some of us have had the shock of having to lose all of our revenue overnight. So that's been something to adjust. And I've been incredibly impressed when I've been going around speaking to all the startups about just how quickly everybody's adapted and adjusted or created new products or innovation or different business models. That said, the government's been super generous and offered us a ton of support, but actually, it's in the detail. So we're going to try and work this all out today. So I'm going to get the incredible experts from RSM to quickly introduce themselves one by one, and then you can understand who's there. And then I'm going to explain to you a little bit about the format, because we're trying to stay true to YFood guided, the YFood sort of format. So I'll explain how it's all going to work in a little bit. David, would you like to pop your camera on and your voice and just introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. Hi, everyone. I'm David McDonnell. I'm a director at RSM, and I specialise in VAT consultancy and advisory services.
So you're going to be pretty key to this conversation with all the changes in VAT.
Possibly so, yeah, absolutely.
Super. Thank you, David. And Charlie, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, I'm Charlie Barnes. I'm a director at RSM in their legal services team. I'm an employment lawyer by trade, so I'll be looking at the key aspects of the job retention scheme.
Amazing, thank you so much. That's pretty key to this conversation.
Yeah.
Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Ryan Broomfield. I'm a partner at RSM in the corporate tax team, advising businesses on structuring and also looking to it. And I also lead the relationship with YFood, and have worked with Nadia for the last couple of years. So looking forward to today's chat.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for making this happen today as well. And last but not least, Damian, would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Hi, it's Damian. I'm a restructuring partner at RSM. I focus on working with businesses that have got some form of challenge.
Super, thanks, Damian. Okay, super. So the way it's all going to work today is we're going to divide the conversation into three key areas. We're going to talk about, first of all, the first area we're going to talk about is job retention. So looking at employment, job retention, statutory sick pay, and all the employment rights around that. The second area we're going to focus on is tax, so looking at deferrals of tax payments. And the third area we're going to look at is cash flow and how can we access additional sources of funding, be it through the Business Interruption Loan scheme or not. So that's the format for the first three areas. So we're going to get an introduction from the RSM expert as to what's happening in that area, some Q&A from me, and then what we really want to get to is the Q&A from you guys, because we are a community and having your voice as part of this is really important to us. So we've been a little bit brave. So I need everybody to help me out and follow the rules the best they can. So if you want to ask a question after each section, you've got to raise your hand. So you put your hands up. There's a little icon on your bar somewhere, a little hand. You just need to tap that. So we'll start queuing your questions. When I'm ready for you to ask your question, I'll let you know by name and unmute you. And then you'll be able to have a chance to actually speak directly with the experts. Try your hardest to keep the questions relevant for everyone and not specifically crazy about the time when your gran came over, that one time with the dog, and et cetera, et cetera. Let's focus on generic examples that are relevant and useful for everyone. So make sure you've identified your hand icon. If we don't get to it in the section, we're going to try and queue questions up for the end. So I'll let you know what to do when that comes up. So amazing, guys. Thanks so much. We are actually kicking off with Charlie around job retention scheme, and statutory sick pay. So Charlie, do you want to just give us a quick overview about what is on offer, just high level?
The job retention scheme, this was announced by the government to support employers whose operations have been severely impacted by COVID-19. All employers are eligible to apply for a grant, which is operated by HMRC. And effectively, it means that you can furlough employees for a period of time, which is a minimum of 3 weeks, and during which they cannot perform any work for you. Doesn't apply to the self-employed. And the grant that you can claim back from HMRC is effectively the lower of 80% of the wage costs of each employee, or £2,500 per month. And on top of that, you can also claim back the employer's NIC and the 3% statutory minimum employer's pension contribution. Key aspect of it is that those employees that you can claim back for have to be on your payroll as of the 28th of February 2020. So you have to have a UK payroll, and you also have to have a UK bank account. If you've made anyone redundant since the 28th of February or laid them off, then you can still claim for them under the scheme, but you would have to rehire them back effectively, so that there was no actual sort of redundancy or layoff. Scheme's currently in operation from the 1st of March to the 31st of May. But we have been told that it will be kept under review and extended if necessary. And as yet, we haven't seen what the HMRC portal will look like to make the claim, but we are expecting to have it up and running by the end of April. So that's the job retention scheme. That's some key aspects of that. Is a very high level review. Statutory sick pay, some changes there really is that what the position used to be is that you only had to pay workers statutory sick pay from the 4th day of sickness absence. That has changed in respect of any coronavirus related absence. So that's if they've got coronavirus, if they've got symptoms, if someone in their household has symptoms, or if they've been told to self-isolate, they are entitled to statutory sick pay from day one. But employers with less than 250 employees as at the 28th of February, they're able to claim for the first 14 days statutory sick pay. Again, that claim would be from HMRC, but yet we're still waiting to hear what you would have to, or how that claim would work. But we anticipate it will be very much like any claim for other statutory payments, such as statutory maternity pay. So yes, that's in a nutshell the two main types of sort of benefit that the government are providing to employers in respect of their employees.
Super, that's really helpful. So I have a few questions. So to start with the basics. So if you furlough your team, what are they allowed to do?
So they're not allowed to perform any work for you that might generate revenue effectively. So what the guidance says is that they can undertake training and they can also volunteer, but they couldn't volunteer for you, again, where it might be deemed to be generating any revenue for you. So it is quite limited in terms of what it is that they can do.
Yeah, okay, so that makes complete sense. And so training is allowed. We're saying training's allowed, okay, but nothing else that generates revenue, because it's a little bit tricky. And I have to say, for startups, if you actually have your team furloughed at home and they can do training, that's really, really valuable, because we often have new teams coming in that we never have time to train them up properly, to get them up to speed and up to grips with that training. So when they come back, they're faster, they're better, they're quicker, and they're more, have learned more about their business. That makes complete and utter sense. So I think that's really a great option. So on the 28th, is there any flexibility on that? So
as
I've
it stands,
got my team, for example, she joined YFood on the 3rd of March. So there's nothing she could do about that. There's nothing we can do about that if we wanted to furlough them.
No, but the only thing you could say to her would be, could she speak to her previous employer if she was on their payroll on the 28th of February? Mm-hmm. And then effectively they would have to rehire her though. So this is what HMRC is saying to people in that situation, but that brings complications for you as their current employer, it brings complications for their previous employer. So there is an option, it's just that it requires some sort of flexibility from the employers, and it has complications for them. So it does need to be thought through. but it's a loophole that is being, certainly MPs are having lots of questions raised with them.
Yeah, I'm sure, because it feels a little bit unfair, doesn't it? I'm sure, like, if you've got someone in your team like that, or even they might be feeling that it's a bit unfair for them because they haven't got that option. So yeah, it does feel as unfair. If anybody in the audience or attending the event has a question, start raising your hands now, like we normally do, so that I can actually just have a sense of how many questions there are out there. You can ask whatever you want, as long as it's not the example about your dog and your gran and everything else that is going to be, crazy in that list. Because we would love to make this a proper YFood event. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna tap in and out between my questions and the audience questions. So I've got a question here from Mark Appleton. Mark, I'm going to give you permission to speak. You just need to accept it and unmute your mic and ask your question.
Hi Nadia. Hi guys. How are we all? So, dead quick question on this. If employees are furloughed for your company, are they able to undertake economic activities for another company during that period?
So the guidance again has a little bit of a gap here. What it does say is that they can undertake work for another employer, but it only refers to where they had that employment at the point at which you'd furloughed them. So the question is that sort of raises, well, can they go and work for someone else? We don't know. If we're hoping we're going to get more guidance on that particular point, but one thing I would say is it depends upon your contracts of employment. Does it allow them to go and work for someone else whilst they're employed by you for a start? So that would be your starting point. But I think I would be a bit cautious about saying to them that they could go and work for someone else, because my concern is that you've got to remember that you will be paying these people or your employees whilst you furlough them, and you effectively want to ensure that you can claim that money back from HMRC, and we don't know yet what level of scrutiny HMRC will apply to the claims. And they've also said that they reserve the right to audit any claim that you make at some point in the future, and that's any aspect of any claim. So I do think you just need to be a bit cautious about sort of encouraging employees to say, well, they can go and do other things. But of course, other than the volunteering training that they can undertake, that's all that the guidance says at the moment.
Super,
Great,
thanks.
thanks.
Thanks, Mark. So Charlie, one of the things that I like, so it's great, the furlough scheme exists, like you've decided that you're going to put some of your team on furlough. How do you go about it? It's not as simple as just going, I'm putting my team on furlough, right? There's a few things we need to be careful with from a legal perspective, right?
Very, very much so, yeah. Because as soon as this obviously was announced, I think literally quite a few employers just furloughed everyone. I can understand that the panic that caused that, because literally revenue had dropped off a cliff. But you do need to plan what you're going to do. So the first thing to think about is, are you going to pay what the government is going to allow you to claim back, or are you going to continue to pay the full salary? Then when you've decided what you're going to do on that, because that is a key, a bit of confusion is around, do you have to top up? No, you don't have to top up. But what you must do is you ensure that you vary the contracts of your employees if you are only going to pay what the government is going to allow you to claim back. Now, as that's a change to someone's terms and conditions of employment, it requires their agreement. So you do need to enter into some form of consultation with them about this particular change. But obviously, that consultation shouldn't be too tricky, because the alternative is going to be much worse, which would potentially, if they didn't agree to it, then it's either going to be redundancy or layoff. So I can't imagine there'll be much many people not agreeing to this particular change. But it is crucial that you do carry out some form of consultation with them. And even if you are agreeing to pay 100% of salary, still furloughing them would require some agreement from them, because effectively you're not providing them with any work for a certain period of time. If you are in a situation where you're having to choose who to furlough because you've got to drop off in work from certain parts of the organisation, then I just think you just have to consider it very much like a redundancy process. Although be very careful not to explain that is what it is, but the process is similar in the terms of you need to be reasonable about who you are selecting for furlough. and you need to ensure that there's no sort of underlying discriminatory aspect of why you're making the decision you're making. So that basic employment law principles.
Yeah, so would you recommend having a conversation with your teams, the ones you're thinking about furloughing, talking through what's going to happen and the options, and seeing if they are comfortable with that as an option, and then following up in writing, I guess, to document what is the conversation you guys have had?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very much guided by, I think, your ethos as an employer, and, you know, how you would normally communicate with your staff. I mean, one of the key things is communication is absolutely crucial, but communication to everyone so that everyone knows what's going on. But certainly, obviously, if you have some individuals in mind, then yes, those are the ones that you will need to be speaking to effectively position this option to them. And certainly one of the things that we've had conversations with clients about is you might want to be speaking to those who have childcare obligations, or who are looking after a vulnerable adult, for example, because actually they might benefit from that furlough leave, because it would mean that it frees up some time for them effectively to be able to do that other thing, you know, their other job at the moment, basically.
Yeah, super. So we've got a couple of questions coming up on the chat, and if anyone else wants to ask one verbally, we've got time for maybe one more, so raise your hand. So the ones that are coming up on the chat are effectively around maternity. So what happens if you're going to end up with maternity leave crossing over with furlough leave? I guess that's a little bit similar to what we were chatting about earlier in terms of holidays as well. So probably could just cover off both there.
Yeah, well, I mean, the holiday point is definitely a very complicated area that's being much debated at the moment. With maternity leave, it was covered in the guidance. I think the position would be, if you've got someone on maternity leave and you just pay statutory maternity pay, then I think you would just leave them as is effectively, because you're already under a legal obligation to pay SMP, and you can't vary that. It's already calculated and dealt with. But the guidance does say that, so if you pay enhanced contractual maternity pay, then the guidance does say that you could furlough them. So effectively, you could furlough them and then claim back the enhanced element as their as the wage costs, in terms of the 80% of their wage costs, or £2,500 a month. So there is a distinction between those who you pay statutory and those who you pay contractual.
Okay, super. That's really helpful. We've got one more question from the audience. Give me 2 seconds. Emily, I'm going to allow you to speak. You just need to accept and unmute your mic.
Hello. I just wanted to ask a question around whether you can effectively tag people in and out of furlough across the next few months. Say, for example, as an arbitrary example, you run a golf course and you have 3 greenkeepers. You might need 1 greenkeeper to maintain some service across the next 3 months, but you might like to almost divvy out the imposed pay cut across your team members of 3 people. Can you effectively put each of them on furlough for 3 months to spread that burden out across them, rather than having one member of the team take it for the full period?
Hi, Emily. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. The key thing you need to make sure is that your minimum furlough period for each employee is 3 weeks. Because if it's not 3 weeks, you will not be able to claim that back. So that's not. And the other thing to remember is just to ensure that ultimately there is a reduction. You know, you're impacted by the coronavirus, and there is a reduction in work to do. And I think, you know, that sometimes is overlooked maybe in the guidance, but I just worry that, again, you know, this scheme is potentially going to be open to abuse, and therefore might not happen now, but at a later stage when HMRC might start auditing these claims, just be very careful to audit your processes and the reasons why you made the decisions that you did about why you furloughed that particular person, why there was no work. But there's nothing to say you couldn't do that, no.
And that's going to be a repeated theme through our chat here, is actually it's really important to follow up with the written documentation around all the decisions you're making, guys. It's not good enough just to have a conversation. It impacts your future liabilities, the future, and if anything's coming back and being looked at, investigated, whether it's for due diligence in the future on your business when you're trying to sell it, all of this stuff needs to be documented properly. I've got a couple more questions, but I am conscious for time on how to move on, but I think they're probably key questions that other people will have as well. Are we allowed to, because there's a whole chat around, can directors be furloughed or not? And a lot of us are directors of companies because we're founders. Can we furlough ourselves?
Yeah, so a director is still an employee. Well, a director can be an employee of a business, so long as you satisfy the necessary legal definition. And normally, I'm assuming you guys probably would be. So absolutely, you can take advantage of the scheme, but you just need to distinguish between what your statutory duties are as a director, which you could continue to perform whilst you're furloughed, but your duties as an employee, again, you would have to be performing no work. So that's the thing I think you need to be a bit careful about. For example, I've had discussions with clients about, well, we might be making decisions about when to continue to furlough someone or not. And it's like, well, actually, are you performing your duties as an employee of the business, or is that performing a function as a statutory director? So I think there's a little bit of grey there. And again, that's an area I wonder whether HMRC will look to investigate at a later stage. But yes.
Yeah, and it's tempting, isn't it? Because the reality is, if you furloughed your entire team, you still have obligations and stuff that you need to do.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you still have like a brand presence to run. Let's say you've lost all your operations, all your business, all of your revenue. You still have a brand to maintain.
That's the difficulty.
It is challenging. But,
and I think, the safest, but I appreciate it's not practical positions if you're simply just mothballing for like 3 months and then you're just down tools and doing something else. But that's reality of what you're going to be doing.
Exactly. I think like legitimately, if you're furloughing yourself, you probably need to be giving yourself at least the 3 weeks you're furloughed for, whatever.
Yeah.
The chance to not be operating in revenue generating situations within your business.
Yeah, that's a good solution, is effectively furlough for a 3-week period and then maybe activity for a week in terms of decision making, and then you might be able to furlough again for another 3 weeks.
Yeah. Give yourself some brain space, guys. Like have a bit of thinking space about where the future of your business is going to be going. So my last question before we move on, because we do need to move on to the last section because I'm slightly lagging behind, is on timings. So we go into the HMRC portal and we log that we want to make a claim for furlough for the team's members that we've chosen. When's that happening?
Good question. We believe end of April is when the portal is going to be open. Obviously, fingers crossed. I would be saying that even if it is open, then I expect it's going to take a lot for HMRC to deliver on all of the applications that are made. So I just think you have to take that into consideration in terms of your cash flow. For example, April, I think you need to basically work on the assumption that you are going to have to pay your April payroll run without having that grant in place, and possibly even May. But I'd hope that we would be in a position by then where most of these claims are being processed.
Yeah, so I think like some people in the audience will probably, and we're asking it as well, if we've got team furloughed and we haven't got the funds, let's say between that point where that money comes in and they don't, what does that mean?
So the government would, I think, expect you in that situation to be exploring the short-term business interruption loan, but I know we'll hear more about that later, but there are some significant issues that we have with that. In the absence of being able to obtain any finance, I have had conversations with clients who've said, we're just not going to pay until we know we're getting that money back. The difficulty that creates is then effectively you're breaching the contract of employment, and that is a fundamental breach which entitles the employee to resign and claim constructive unfair dismissal, and that would be a very easy claim for them to bring. But if you've got a good relationship, good rapport with a strong team who are buying into your ethos and what you're trying to achieve, then it's possible that you might be able to get them to agree to the premise that effectively until we get that money back, or we've got guarantees that that's when we'll pay you. But again, that will need good communication with your team, and I suppose the bigger that you are, the more risk that you'll be taking on with that approach. Yeah,
cool. And then the last question is, if the 80% brings the salary into below the national minimum wage, do we need to worry about that?
Shouldn't be a problem, because effectively national minimum wage, when you look at is relying on a calculation of the working time. And when you load, you are not working. So effectively there's no hours of work. So basically you'll be well in excess of the national minimum wage level, because there'll be no work being carried out. The only thing you need to remember, but you should still be fine, because assuming you'll be paying the 80%, is that any time spent training, that has to be paid at national minimum wage rates. So it still should be okay, but you just need to take that into consideration.
So guys, if you're training, you need to pay national minimum wage rate. don't worry about it otherwise, because of that, effectively your team aren't doing any hours. If you're a director, you can furlough yourself based on your PAYE amount, but don't be generating revenue for your business. So don't be actively working, actually take a break from it. There's going to be a timing mismatch. So we're going to be getting probably the portal up in April, hopefully, looking at payments coming in May. From a legal perspective, contractually, you're due to pay your employees on time. If you've got a great working relationship with your team and everybody's buying into the long-term future of your business, you may be able to negotiate with those guys to come up with some sort of bespoke agreement, but just be aware of that. It's key throughout this whole process to evidence everything. So Charlie, thank you so much. He's going to be available for more questions at the end. We're about to move on to tax. Tax is the next big question. So I'm going to mute you out, Charlie. Give me 2 seconds. And I'm going to bring David to the front to have a little chat about what's available for VAT.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. So it's actually pretty good news on VAT in the sense that the government have announced that any VAT payments that are due from the date of the announcement, so 20th of March, until the end of June, any VAT payments that fall due within that period can be deferred. So there's no obligation to make any VAT payments at all. And obviously we've got some clients who are saying, well, can I still make a VAT payment? And we're saying, well you can. But why would you? Effectively, the government are saying there's an interest-free loan there, and whatever your net VAT payments will be, you don't have to pay, and you don't have to pay for the deferral period. So up until the end of June, you've got until the end of March next year, 2021, to actually make those payments. So it's a deferral for anything that's due in the next 3 months, and it's deferred effectively for another year. There is a question then about what about payments that are due after that date. So it might relate to the deferral period, but it relates to the payment would actually be due after that date. So say, for example, your June VAT return. So at the moment, the deferral period is just till the end of June. My guess is, we just wait and see what happens, because it could be that they extend that deferral period further. So at the moment, no payments are due. The key points there are, if you've got a direct debit set up with HMRC, make sure you cancel that direct debit. And if you make payments on account, anything like that, those payments aren't due. So make sure you take positive action with your bank to cancel any payments that otherwise would be due, because we can't rely on HMRC not to take them, because obviously they've got big systems that are set up will take ages to change. But if you cancel direct debits, no payments are actually going to be due.
Brilliant, thanks David. If anyone's got questions, again, raise your hand and we'll get to them. But I've got a few, and they might seem silly questions to you, but they are good questions to me, because we're all trying to puzzle through how we are going to actually practically work through this. So I want to take advantage of the deferral, my VAT. What do I have to do? Do I have to submit my VAT return still?
Yeah, so VAT returns are still due. So that's what they said. VAT returns are still due. Now, I think practically speaking, they do realise that sometimes it's just not going to be possible to get all the information together to put on a VAT return. But technically, VAT returns are still due. They will give you permission to make an estimated return. So basically, you can get to as close as what you think the figure is and make that return on an estimated basis to be corrected at a later date. But in terms of the deferral of payments, nothing needs to be done. So if your VAT return is due, it's due to be paid this week, some VAT returns will be due to be paid this week, you just don't have to make that payment. You don't have to apply, you don't have to ask permission, you just don't make the payment.
Just skip it. So just
skip it.
don't pay it. And if I've got a direct debit, I make sure I cancel that. So they don't.
Make sure you, and that's quite key, because make sure you cancel your direct debits.
So this they have made easy for us then. This is relatively easy. But what if I'm in a situation where I'm actually due a reclaim or a repayment on VAT rather than due to make a payment? Are they giving me that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're normally in a repayment position, so your VAT returns are for claiming money back rather than paying VAT across, they're still making repayments. So they would be made in the normal way. You submit your return and then you can expect a payment electronically in most cases within a few weeks of the return being due. One thing to say on that is that some businesses that maybe don't normally get repayments of that. If your income has fallen away, but your expenses are still there, then you might be tipping into a repayment position. So for businesses that are in a repayment position, you can actually ask for monthly VAT returns. So I know for lots of businesses that sounds sort of counterintuitive. Or why would I want to fill in a VAT return monthly? But if you're due money back each quarter, then it makes more sense to do a monthly VAT return, and it just eases cash flow. So when you're paying the VAT out on your purchases, you can actually get it back quicker.
Super, thank you. So I'm going to move on to employment taxes. So it's really easy for me to defer my VAT, which I think everybody's probably on this call going to take advantage of that immediately, and it sounds like it's quite an easy process to follow. So thank you so much about that. Can we defer any employment taxes, Ryan?
Yes is the answer to that, Nadia, but it's not quite as straightforward as David's just illustrated for VAT. The government has made it a simpler process on the VAT side of things. But there is an existing scheme called Time to Pay for taxes, and basically you have to apply to HMRC for a bespoke agreement with them to settle taxes at a deferred instalment schedule. Can also apply to corporation tax. That scheme was already in place, but it's becoming more and more used given the circumstances. And very quickly, the government realised this was the case and put it forward very early on in the process. And based on my experience of talking to clients, it's a very popular service, and therefore it's presented challenges to get hold of HMRC through their direct line that they've set up. They have put in place probably about 2,000 advisors to deal with these claims, but as you can appreciate, there are lots of businesses looking to defer payment, and problems have arisen. So we have had examples of clients not getting through on the direct line, and therefore having to think about how best to protect themselves in deferring any payments. And I think that's an important point to make across all of these conversations that we're having today. This is a deferral of tax. It's not a waiver of tax. The tax will need to be paid at some point. So the process really is try your best to get hold of HMRC versus the direct line. If that can't be achieved, write a letter to the relevant tax office for PAYE, potentially corporation as well, and just protect yourself. You've mentioned already the need to document things. This is just one example. Making sure you've got the paperwork in place. Particularly with some of the stuff that Charlie's been talking about with furloughing, you have to bear in mind that furloughing is a different process to the PAYE compliance. So the furlough is a grant from the HMRC, from the government to support the payment of tax and wages. You still then have to process it. You still have to do returns as required to report the tax that's due to HMRC, both employment taxes and corporation tax. So there's certain things you still need to do, but the payment to protect your cash flow can be deferred. Now,
okay, just to make that super clear, to make sure I understand that, what you're saying is, if we want to ask for a time, a payment plan or a deferred time to be able to pay on employment tax, we need to get onto the HMRC hotline and ask them for that and negotiate that process with them. And your recommendation is, if we can't get through, to make sure we're documenting that whole thing. And with the furloughed team members, we actually are due to pay that tax in April for the ones that are furloughed, but we probably won't have had the claim in from HMRC yet. So maybe we need to go and negotiate that deferral for them as well, because they'll be expecting that money in.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. All right, so if we can't get through on the hotline, and we're going to share that hotline number at the end of this talk, guys. If we can't get through on the hotline, what do you suggest? I know you said we should evidence stuff, but what types of things could we do to evidence practically?
Well, you still have to do the normal payroll filings and real-time information, but you need to write to HMRC setting out your facts that you've tried to contact the direct line. You failed to do so at this stage, You are therefore writing to inform HMRC that, given circumstances, there are certain things you need to demonstrate to HMRC to get a time to pay agreement. So you need to demonstrate that you can't meet the tax bill at this time. Normally, HMRC would agree a time schedule over the next 12 months to do so, and therefore you're putting forward the reasons why you can't make the payment and seeking their agreement to defer payment along the time frame you want to put forward.
Maybe attach a cash flow forecast. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Cash flow. Yeah. Although be mindful of confidentiality and how you're going to send it in the post.
Yeah. Or maybe just
one thing
have one ready, have one documented and ready to send them. Is that a better plan?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, normally the time to pay scheme, they would ask these questions in a bit more detail. Experience is that to date, they've been much more accommodating and not seeking as much information at this stage. But given Charlie's comments earlier about HMRC will reserve the right to review things, as much evidence as possible to support your position.
Super. Thank you so much, Ryan. And the last question I have for you guys before we move on to the cash flow section with Damian is around, a lot of the startups in our community are here with a view to exit. They are, growing their business. They want to be purchased in the future. And obviously, this is not in our plans. So what can we do that's the best way of managing and dealing with all of this stuff so that when we do come to selling our businesses, it isn't going to have a hugely negative impact?
So I do a lot of due diligence on businesses as they're looking to exit. And I'm sure this will be coming off over 2 or 3 years as part of that process. And whilst there'll be a degree of sympathy in looking at this kind of situation, ultimately it is evidence. You need to demonstrate that you've met your filing obligations, that you've kept the appropriate records for documenting who's been furloughed, how you've gone about calculating the amounts available to be reclaimed in relation to statutory sick pay, in relation to the furloughing, in relation to deferring VAT, across all taxes. So it's very much a case of think of it as business as usual in terms of your ongoing filing with a view to either HMRC or a potential purchaser coming along and saying, I want to inspect your records. Why haven't you done this? Oh, well, you've got an exposure there. We're going to price check the potential sales price. So do things by the book. As I said at the outset, this is really a mechanism to help with cash flow. The basics still need to be done in terms of your compliance to avoid the future.
It is, and that's exactly it. I mean, depending on who you're getting purchased by, the detail and the due diligence they might do is extensive. You could be really asked to provide documents on everything. And if you're sort of 3 or 4 years post this, looking at a sale, and they're asking you, why did you make a decision on this team member? Why did that happen with that team member? Did that team member agree to this? If you haven't got all of those things written down or documented, it potentially could cause you challenges. If you've got it really nicely, cleanly documented, all in one folder, you'll be able to explain everything to everyone, and it'll all be fine because everybody understands this wasn't something that we've asked for. It's something that's here that we have to deal with, and how you as a business have navigated it in a mature, sensible way will show the credibility of the business behind it. So thanks so much, David and Ryan. I'm going to quickly do a recap. So basically, guys, VAT, we can defer it. You just need to get your return in as you normally would do. If you're light resourced and you haven't got resources to do a full VAT return at the moment, you could try and estimate it. It's deferred until 31st of March next year. Is that the correct date, David? Yeah, cool. It means you have to pay it back at some point. You just don't need to pay it now. On employment tax, if you're really up against it, you can also get on touch with the HMRC hotline and ask for a deferral on that as well. They are basically being a lot more lenient on this, but you will need to show that you are in a more challenged environment, that you probably haven't got the cash flow to meet that payment right now. If you're furloughing employees, do not forget there's going to be a discrepancy on the time when you receive the money and you're due to pay employment tax on that. So probably get onto HMRC and have that conversation with them. I'm doing that. I'm also going to ask Damian to click himself in and have a little chat to us about cash flow and the options available to us from the business interruption loan. But also maybe there's some other stuff we should be exploring. Damian, let me unmute you.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, just further to those conversations that Ryan mentioned, just in respect of the position with HMRC, they are being very practical at the moment, which you couldn't necessarily say about them potentially a month ago. There is a clear government guidance on how they should be approaching these circumstances. So I think the key point is to engage with them, ensure they've got the information they need. But in many cases, they are looking to support businesses in the interim. And I've got a number of recent examples of businesses where they've effectively had deferral of their HMRC liabilities or payments for 3 months to then agree a time to pay agreement in 3 months' time. But I think it's worth following the guidance that Ryan set out. But I think the key thing is, from being the big bad man that the revenue can be, they're actually being very humane and proactive at this point in time. So it's worth making sure that you reach out to them in some way or form. And in these circumstances where it's hard to get through on the phone and electronic media and so on, I still think sticking something in the post is always a good thing to do, because you've got it on file and that's addressed then, so they can match you. In terms of what I do, I'm a restructuring specialist. So cut to the chase. This is my world basically. Urgency and panic is what I do on a day-to-day basis. Not at these levels though, I must admit. The key thing for any business at the moment, the big problem you've all got is that overnight sales or demand has collapsed. And that for most of you to actually forecast that or sensitize that isn't possible. You'd never have been asked in any form of scenario to suggest that in the space of a month all your sales would just disappear overnight. So the problem you've got is you've got significant uncertainty. We don't know, I don't know, when is this going to end? It could end in 2 months, it could end in 3 months. And during that period of time, you've got costs and the associated consequences of that. The only certainties you have got is fundamentally how much cash you've got in the bank today, and also what costs or expenses you may have to pay in the future. And so one of the key things that we're recommending to businesses is that they put together a 13-week cash flow. And this is very, very basic. So don't feel you have to be a rocket scientist or an Excel genius. It is simply just showing cash in and cash out. We're starting with today's date and just looking at your bank statements to see what comes in and what goes out. And then thinking about what you can practically do to manage that cash. And be brutal honest, you won't get it right. So if you try and do it your own personal finances, you'll struggle to do it. For business finance, it's often harder. But what it allows you to do is see what the pinch points of your cash may be over the next 1 to 3 months and see how you can manage them. And it could be that, for instance, you turn off direct debits, you turn off standing orders. But you may see that there's an ability to push certain things out. Obviously, we've alluded to it earlier. If you think about what your principal costs are, so HMRC, you don't have to pay your VAT payments for the next quarter effectively. Also in terms of the national insurance and other HMRC payments, as we've alluded to, HMRC have been very practical. You can effectively defer those. In terms of your employment costs, you've got the furlough scheme. And from many of you obviously will rent bills and pay landlords. The landlords have got no ability at the moment to enforce forfeiture. So effectively that can be deferred. Now again, as we highlighted earlier, you're deferring many of these costs. So they're not being written off. They will come back at some stage. But what effectively the government is allowing you is the ability to mothball your business for 2 to 3 months to assist in putting some form of strategy together. So that allows you and your own cash flow to build a sensible strategy around that, about what you can and can't do. And the first thing I think you should all do is look at your direct debits and look at your standing orders. Many of you, will be aware now of the ability to defer VAT. If you haven't turned the standing order off, the revenue will collect it. And getting that back, bear in mind you can't get through on the phone, will be very difficult. So you need to revisit things like this and look at payments and how you pay people and how you manage your cash flow. And keep doing that on a regular basis as things develop.
I think that's really useful, because I think the first point of call before we even get into taking loans, because loans have to be repaid, is how do we actually reduce our costs to the level that we can operate our businesses within. Software subscriptions, we're subscribed to everything, not anymore. So it's literally have a little look through what you are paying for as a business, get on top of it all and look at where you can realistically, what is it you actually need through the next few months and what is it you don't. Is that good advice, Damian? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. we work on the premise of you pay critical suppliers and you don't pay non-critical suppliers. Mm-hmm. So fundamentally, the only people you're really should be paying now are those that are either generating income at this point in time or will lead to the business failing in the short term. Now, in all honesty, if the government are paying your workers on the furlough scheme, I can't see who else is critical. You may have problems with the likes of Amazon and data providers, because if they turn you off, you can lose your platform in some way or form. So that's something to bear in mind. And I think the government are looking at tools to protect around that, but that's not been invoked yet. But again, that's the key thing. And obviously, in terms of having this cash flow and having this knowledge is then really important in terms of how you approach HMRC or the banks. If you turn up to the bank and you ask for a loan and they say, what have you done? And we say, we've done nothing. They're not going to take you seriously. But if you've shown that you've cut costs, if you've shown you've got cash flow, it gives them the ability then to give you a loan. In terms of the CBILS scheme, which is the government loan scheme, I'm not talking too much detail about it because they're going to announce some amendments to that later today. But in summary, you should approach your existing bank to access the CBILS scheme, and they are looking to open that up now because it's been quite restrictive. And essentially what the banks have done is the banks have basically refused to take any applications from third parties. They've only dealt with existing customers, and that's because they've just been overwhelmed with applications. You've also had issues in the sense that the banks have been asking for personal guarantees. Now, they announced last night, and this will be confirmed later today by the Chancellor, that any loans less than £250,000 will not require a personal guarantee. But again, you have to show there has to be some form of viability or some form of logic to why you want the loan, because again, it is a loan. The idea is it will be paid back. It appears they will be softening that over the next 24, 48 hours. We've got documents illustrating the process to apply, but there's also various brokers who can assist in that process. And also, depending on the nature of the loan size, you'll have to approach a certain type of lender. Obviously, the major high street banks are generally your first port of call, but the likes of Funding Circle, who offer loans to businesses, their platform works very quickly, and there's other platforms like that where you can access loans or find out what the loan's for. But again, it is a loan; it will have to be paid back, and if you're fundamentally burning too much money in the short term, your ability to pay that back is going to be very difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. It's thinking about, and that's what I was going to say, in any loans, regardless of it's the business interruption loan, the coronavirus business interruption loan. What are the things that we should be thinking about? How do we actually structure that repayment? Do we have enough cash flow to be able to make that happen in the future? Is there anything else that these guys need to be looking out for beyond personal guarantees, which looks like that's going away now?
Yeah, but you obviously look at the pricing of the loans and that sort of thing, and just work out the consequences of that. It's going to be very hard for you to forecast if you can afford to repay the loan back, because
that's the hard part.
Yeah, what you're gonna have to do is some sort of tapered increase in activity, probably from June, July time, probably back to normality in September, October time. Nobody knows this, but the banks the banks are going to get a massive kick from the Chancellor later today, and it'll be interesting. It's worth watching the news and also the publicity today, because it'll be very clear in terms of what the messaging is on that. But the banks, again, you've got to bear in mind that this is not business as normal. It will take them time to process these applications. That's why if you're looking for a loan sub 250. You may want to sort of approach one of the automated lenders, someone like Funding Circle, the likes of those, because those guys will process quite quickly, but their cost of funds is generally higher, and historically they've always required PGs.
Yeah, and I think if you've really got genuine problems at the moment, and some of the people in our community have lost literally their entire revenue overnight, their entire client base has had to shut down, which has caused them to then have to lose all of their revenue overnight, or whatever it is. So those types of companies, we've never forecasted being in that type of situation. So you do have genuine challenges. So you probably do need a year's break of having to make those repayments.
I think the other thing to think about is, why are you getting a loan? What are you using the loan for? Mm-hmm. Because if the government are paying your wages, you're not paying you're not paying tax, you're not paying your rent. You need to think about what the request of the loan is going to be for, what you need to utilise the money for, because potentially you might be able to get through this process and then do some form of restructuring exercise, or there's other solutions potentially whereby you potentially compromise people, or you push people in a certain direction, or you agree with payment plans. So rather than incur more debt to get yourself out, you actually push that debt. So rather than you occurring as a business, you push that debt back onto your supplier or your other stakeholder, and say, bear with us, work with us, we'll agree a repayment plan with you. I think that might be a more feasible option rather than trying to adopt more debt and pay out probably suppliers or creditors who probably can take the hit themselves.
Yeah, okay, cool. That's really helpful. Does anyone have questions in general? If you do, start putting your hands up, so I'm going to invite all the panelists back. Damian, that was really super helpful. But basically, the summary is there's going to be some more guidance from the Chancellor today around the business interruption loans, which haven't been really working properly to date, because a lot of the banks have been making you go through a commercial loan process first, and then also asking for personal guarantees, which obviously defeats the purpose. But the real message from Damian here is actually, given you have to pay this loan back, can you get through this process without taking on a loan? And maybe you should be looking at how do you reduce your costs and what do you not need to be paying for right now. So if you guys have any more questions, raise your hands. Otherwise, I'm going to bring the panelists back just to say goodbyes and thank yous. Let me unmute you all. Can you all unmute and add into your videos quickly for one moment of chaos at the end? Super. So yeah, thank you so much for all of your time today. Really appreciate you guys being here. And a massive thank you. There's a slide that I'm going to put up at the end for everybody, which will show all of these guys' details. So thank you so much for being generous enough to share that with the community. So grateful in this busy period that we could have got 4 complete experts from RSM here. So if you do, I can see people posting messages, but I'm not sure what they are there. Hang on 2 seconds.
Yeah, I think someone's come in saying that they think that those who are self-employed are allowed to work, and that could possibly be right. I just haven't looked into it, but yeah. I think be making sure that if you are in that situation that you do follow the guidance, because again, it's just, we don't know how HMRC are going to treat these claims. And I think you need to ensure that, again, you've got that audit trail of ensuring that the guidance says. And if the guidance is unclear, then that might give you an avenue to do something like that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, just sorry, Nadia, just to add, for income tax purposes for the self-employed, there is an automatic relief to defer July's tax payment. So it's very similar to the VAT system that's been put in place. So that should help with the cash flow over the next few months. But again, it will be due next year as payable to HMRC. So
for income tax for the self-employed, there's an automatic deferral on that tax. Again, the same dates as the VAT is March.
No, to 30. It's deferred until 31st of January next year.
31st of January next year. But yeah, well, that's super helpful as well. Any more questions before I'm going to share a slide with everybody with all of these guys' details? It's also got a little bit more information because RSM have amazingly set up a Coronavirus Hub, which they're updating daily. So hopefully today after the Chancellor speaks, there might be some updates and stuff like that. So you can follow all the information on that. So if there's anything you're a little bit confused about, we've also added HMRC's helpline. So if you want to call up and try and defer your employment tax, this is the number you need to use. There's also a link to the government's online page for the helpline as well to give you a little bit more information about that. We're going to be sending a follow-up on Monday with some questions for you guys, so to get some feedback, which will be really helpful about this event, but also about online events you want to see coming forward, but also with some more information that RSM have been kind enough to share with us around what's happening. So thank you very, very much for everybody's time today. Thank you, David. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Damian. You were really, really super helpful. I know you guys are slammed and back to back at the moment, so we all feel incredibly lucky to have had you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.